The verdant lands of southeastern Nigeria bear a heavy heart. Home to the Igbo people, this region, often referred to as Biafra, carries the scars of a troubled past. Nigeria, a nation forged from colonialism, had promised unity and progress. Yet for the Igbo, these promises have rung hollow. The echoes of the Nigerian Civil War still reverberate, exposing deep fault lines within Nigerian society. Decades after the war, the Igbo people continue to grapple with the legacy of broken promises. The Igbo people's grievances against the Nigerian state are manifold and deeply rooted. They point to a pattern of systemic discrimination and marginalization that has persisted since the end of the Civil War. Despite being one of the largest ethnic groups in Nigeria, the Igbo have been systematically underrepresented in key government positions, both in the civil service and the military.
This lack of representation has translated into a lack of influence and control over their own destiny. The Igbo people have seen their fair share of resources siphoned off to other parts of the country, while their own region languishes in relative neglect. Infrastructure remains underdeveloped, education and healthcare systems are inadequate, and economic opportunities are scarce.
Adding insult to injury, the Nigerian government's response to the Igbo people's demands for greater autonomy and self-determination has been one of repression and violence. Peaceful protests have been met with brutal force, and pro-Biafra activists have been subjected to arbitrary arrest, detention, and extrajudicial killings.
This heavy-handed approach has only served to further alienate the Igbo people and solidify their belief that they have no future in a united Nigeria. The chasm between the Igbo and the Nigerian state continues to widen, raising serious questions about the viability of continued coexistence.
In the face of these challenges, many Igbo people see self-determination as the only path forward. The call for an independent Biafra is once again reverberating through the region.
This push is driven by a desire for self-preservation and the right to shape their own destiny. The Igbo people yearn for a homeland where their culture and aspirations are respected.
To comprehend the Igbo
southeast.
As the 1960s progressed, the political landscape of Nigeria became increasingly volatile. A series of military coups, counter-coups, and ethnically motivated violence shook the nation to its core.
The Igbo people, feeling increasingly marginalized and targeted, began to question their place in a nation that seemed determined to silence their voices and deny them their rightful place at the table.
In 1966, a group of young Igbo army officers, frustrated by the corruption and instability that had gripped the nation, staged a coup d'etat. The coup, though short-lived, had far-reaching consequences. It led to a counter-coup by northern officers, followed by a wave of anti-Igbo pogroms in the north, resulting in the deaths of thousands of Igbo civilians.
The violence sent shockwaves through the Igbo community, shattering any remaining illusions of unity and belonging within Nigeria. Faced with the specter of genocide, millions of Igbos fled back to their ancestral lands in the southeast, seeking refuge and protection.
In the aftermath of the pogroms, the calls for secession grew louder. The Igbo people, having witnessed the horrors of ethnic hatred firsthand, felt they had no choice but to seek their own destiny, to create a nation where they could live in peace and security, free from the threat of persecution. On May 30th, 1967, Lieutenant Colonel Emeka Odumegwu Ojukwu, the military governor of the Eastern region, declared the region's secession from Nigeria and the birth of the Republic of Biafra. The declaration was met with swift and brutal force by the Nigerian government, determined to crush the secessionist movement and preserve the territorial integrity of the nation.
The Nigerian Civil War, also known as the Biafran War, lasted for 3 agonizing years, from 1967 to 1970. It was a conflict characterized by its brutality, marked by widespread human rights abuses, indiscriminate bombings of civilian targets, and the deliberate use of starvation as a weapon of war.
The Nigerian government, with the support of Britain and other foreign powers, imposed a blockade on Biafra, cutting off the fledgling nation from essential food and medical supplies. The blockade had a devastating impact on the civilian population, leading to a humanitarian catastrophe of unimaginable proportions.
Millions of Biafran civilians, mostly women and children, perished from starvation and disease. The world watched in horror as images of emaciated children with bloated bellies, their bodies ravaged by kwashiorkor, filled television screens and newspaper pages.
On January 15, 1970, after years of bloody conflict and unimaginable suffering, the Biafran forces surrendered to the Nigerian government. The war was over, but the scars of the conflict ran deep, leaving an indelible mark on the psyche of both the victors and the vanquished.
The Nigerian government, eager to project an image of unity and reconciliation, declared a policy of no victor, no vanquished. However, the reality on the ground told a different story. The Igbo people, though allowed to return to their homes, found themselves on the margins of Nigerian society.
The promises of reconciliation and rehabilitation rang hollow as the Igbo people faced widespread discrimination in education, employment, and access to economic opportunities. Their properties and businesses seized during the war were never returned, and they were excluded from key positions in government and the military.
The Nigerian Civil War, far from healing the divisions within the nation, had only served to exacerbate them. The Igbo people, their dreams of an independent Biafra crushed, were left to grapple with the bitter legacy of conflict. Their hopes for a just and equitable Nigeria seemingly dashed. The seeds of discontent, sown in the years leading up to the war, had taken root, and the dream of a united Nigeria remained elusive.
The end of the Nigerian Civil War in 1970 promised reconciliation for the Igbo people. Yet these promises were more aspirational than actual.
The Igbo, once prominent, found themselves marginalized.
The no victor, no vanquished mantra proved illusory. The reality was far different.
The Igbo faced suspicion and distrust. Their movements were monitored, their loyalty questioned.
Policies aimed at unity further marginalized the Igbo. Subtle discrimination hindered their ability to rebuild.
The unfulfilled promise left the Igbo disillusioned. The wounds of the war festered, poisoning relations. The dream of a united Nigeria seemed distant.
The Igbo people in Nigeria face systematic underrepresentation in politics, despite being one of the largest ethnic groups. This deliberate strategy limits their influence and keeps them from challenging the status quo.
The southeast region, the heartland of the Igbo, is shortchanged in state allocation, reducing their political clout.
This underrepresentation impacts the Igbo's ability to shape their destiny and leaves them feeling marginalized. Beyond the realm of politics, the Igbo people have also faced systematic discrimination in the economic sphere. Despite their renowned entrepreneurial spirit and work ethic, the Igbo have been denied access to the resources, opportunities, and infrastructure needed to thrive economically.
The Nigerian government's approach to economic development has often been characterized by a winner-takes-all mentality, with the lion's share of resources and investments channeled to regions deemed politically expedient.
The Southeast region, still bearing the scars of the Civil War and viewed with suspicion by those in power, has been consistently overlooked and underfunded.
The Igbo people have also been subjected to discriminatory policies that have hampered their ability to compete on a level playing field. Access to credit, essential for business growth and expansion, has been particularly challenging for Igbo entrepreneurs, who often find themselves at the mercy of a financial system that favors those with connections in high places.
This systemic economic strangulation has had a devastating impact on the Igbo people, stifling their entrepreneurial drive, hindering their ability to rebuild their communities, and perpetuating a cycle of poverty and underdevelopment.
The Igbo, once renowned for their economic prowess, have been deliberately held back, their potential squandered by a system rigged against them.
The federal character principle, more aspiration than reality.
The federal character principle aims to ensure inclusivity in Nigeria's diverse society. However, its implementation has often been selective and self-serving.
The Igbo people have been particularly marginalized. This has deepened their sense of injustice and exclusion. The principle, meant to unite, has highlighted Nigeria's unfulfilled potential.
The Nigerian government's response to the Igbo people's calls for autonomy has been marked by repression and intimidation. Peaceful protests have been met with brute force, showing a government intolerant of dissent.
Pro-Biafra groups advocating for a referendum have faced harassment, arbitrary arrests, and detention without trial. Operation Python Dance, a dance of intimidation and violence.
In 2016, the Nigerian government launched Operation Python Dance, aimed at combating crime but quickly targeting pro-Biafra groups.
The military's heavy-handed tactics, including raids and extrajudicial killings, drew condemnation from human rights groups.
Critics argued the operation was disproportionate, escalating tensions and alienating the Igbo people.
Living under military occupation, a climate of fear and distrust.
The heavy military presence in the southeast has cast a long shadow over the lives of the Igbo people.
Checkpoints manned by heavily armed soldiers disrupt commerce and create an atmosphere of intimidation.
The constant surveillance has eroded trust in the government and created a climate of self-censorship.
The language of force, when dialogue is abandoned.
The Nigerian government's reliance on military force to address Igbo grievances shows its failure to engage in meaningful dialogue.
This approach has only served to further alienate the Igbo people.
The international community must urge the Nigerian government to engage in genuine dialogue with the Igbo people.
The specter of genocide, a history marred by atrocities.
The Nigerian civil war continues to cast a long shadow over relations between the Igbo people and the Nigerian state.
The Igbo people point to the horrors they endured as evidence of a deliberate campaign of genocide.
The systematic targeting of civilians and the use of starvation as a weapon of war are just a few of the harrowing accounts from that period.
Starvation as a weapon of war, the unforgivable crime.
The Nigerian government's deliberate use of starvation as a weapon of war against the Biafran people led to a humanitarian catastrophe.
Millions of Biafran civilians were trapped, their access to food and medicine severely restricted.
The deliberate targeting of civilians through starvation constitutes a grave violation of international law.
Echoes of the past ongoing concerns of ethnic cleansing.
The specter of ethnic cleansing continues to haunt the Igbo people.
The deliberate underrepresentation of the Igbo people in key institutions and the systematic denial of resources are seen as part of a broader strategy to keep them marginalized.
These ongoing policies create a climate of fear and stifle economic opportunities.
The legal basis for self-determination.
The principle of self-determination, enshrined in the United Nations Charter, affirms the right of all peoples to determine their political status.
This principle speaks to a fundamental human aspiration, the right to shape their own destiny.
The challenge lies in balancing self-determination with the territorial integrity of existing states.
Remedial secession is a remedy of last resort, invoked only in extraordinary circumstances.
International law does not provide a clear-cut definition of when remedial secession is justified.
The threshold for invoking remedial secession is high, requiring compelling evidence of systematic human rights violations.
The decision to pursue remedial secession is ultimately a political one, made by the aggrieved group.
The Igbo people believe their case meets the high threshold for considering remedial secession.
They argue that their fundamental rights have been systematically violated by the Nigerian state.
The Igbo people's claim to self-determination is not based solely on historical grievances, but also on ongoing discrimination.
Their quest for self-determination is driven by a yearning for freedom, justice, and the right to shape their own destiny.
A call for international action upholding the right to self-determination.
The international community has a moral and legal obligation to uphold the right to self-determination for all peoples.
The international community must send a clear message to the Nigerian government that the use of force against peaceful protesters is unacceptable.
The Igbo people's struggle for self-determination is a reminder that the quest for freedom and justice is universal.
The story of the Igbo people in Nigeria is a testament to the enduring human spirit in the face of adversity. It is also a reminder of the fragility of nations built on broken promises. The deep-seated yearning for self-determination within the Igbo community is the consequence of decades of systemic marginalization.
The Nigerian government's heavy-handed tactics have only served to exacerbate the situation. The presence of heavily armed soldiers stands in stark contrast to the principles of democracy and freedom.
The international community has been remarkably silent on the plight of the Igbo people. This silence is complicit in perpetuating the injustices the Igbo people seek to escape. Self-determination is a universal right, enshrined in international law, affirming the freedom and dignity of all peoples. The Igbo people's quest is a call for recognition and respect, not a rejection of Nigeria.
Dialogue and reconciliation are essential for lasting peace and addressing grievances.
The path forward for the Igbo people in Nigeria is fraught with challenges. The wounds of the past run deep, but history shows conflicts can be resolved through dialogue and compromise.
The Igbo people have shown remarkable resilience and determination. Their entrepreneurial spirit and belief in education give hope for a brighter future.
The international community must stand as a guarantor of peace and justice. The time for change is now. The world is watching.